gives you an in-depth look at topics like what it takes to navigate your spiritual journey, how to heal yourself and grow your spiritual gifts, and balanced practices to expand your business and your spiritual leadership. I'm your host, Spirit Bird, shamanic teacher, healer, and author, here to guide you on your journey to becoming your most potent spiritual leader. I'm so nervous right now for some reason, for lots of reasons. It's a common thing that I feel, being nervous or a little scared. Oftentimes, or at least in my past, what I would do when I get nervous is back out. I would think, well, maybe I'm not ready, or I need to do something else first, or maybe I should get another snack. Or in order to be ready, I need to feel completely confident and clear and not nervous. Isn't that how we know that we're not ready? Not being nervous? And today I want to deep dive into part one of Shaman School's 4-part framework of building spiritual leaders. And that is self-care or self-healing. A major part of self-care and self-healing is really pinpointing what's holding you back so you can make rapid changes. It's about learning how to navigate your spiritual journey and align with what you actually want instead of the fears you have about getting it. And of course, this area of development, we focus on first on the self. What does the self need? What parts of me are being hidden or rejected? How can we foster more self-love or acceptance? This is all about healing the self. And it's always the first step before anything else can happen. You can probably still hear some of the nervousness in my voice. This area of spiritual development emphasizes personal healing and clarity on your specific higher purpose. If we aren't deeply connected and accepting of ourself, we won't have clarity on what we want. If we don't know what we want, it's very difficult to make changes, let alone lasting changes. And what I want to share with you today is self-healing isn't just one and done, right? I've been continuing to work on the nervousness for a long time. There's lots of parts of my journey that I keep working on, that I go through one portal and then come to a new layer or level of healing. So we also have to work through several layers, and it requires a careful balance to really move through healing work in a way that you can use to lead others. Here, we definitely want to look at patterns we have and see what they're really tied to. And usually we need help with this. Unless maybe if you've had really clear trauma that you recall, then you might be really clear on what you need to work through. But even if you don't recall like specific clear trauma, we still usually need other people to help us, one, to see it, and also to have a different perspective of how it might actually be affecting you, because how you think it might be affecting you isn't the way that it really is. So having outside viewpoint can really help you, and this can be a really big revelation. Sometimes working with someone else will help you process it in an entirely different way than you've been trying to process it before. When I was finally able to acknowledge and started to look at my sexual trauma, it was because it started to show up in ways, like in more literal ways. And I was continuing to have like repeated experiences of feeling like I was being invaded, and that's when I finally opened my eyes and began to really see the pattern. And this is again where having having witnesses or an outside perspective can be really helpful, because even though I was quite aware of the pattern at this point and how it was affecting me, I also never said it out loud to anyone. So having a safe space to do that for the first time was really healing for me. You can't skip the step of actually getting your little one or your past self out of the situation that they're repeating and feeling safe. You can't actually just think about it or think about what you know about it or do talk therapy to actually heal the part of you that's still in that experience or feeling trapped in that situation. You can't actually think yourself into retrieving your lost soul parts or unprocessed emotion or whatever it might be that's holding you back. I think that's what really opened the door for me to actually truly find and meet my innocent one. Both being aware of the pattern and being ready for it, being ready to actually look at it. And this also includes being ready to meet my little one who was trapped in that place, who I tried really hard to push away. I share in depth what this process really looked like in the book Sacred Medicine, in my chapter about awakening your magic and meeting your little ones, that inner child retrieval work. And in that process or experience, I really realized that a lot of the magic and the medicine that I carry, I was afraid of, because there was a big part of me that believed if I show up as I really am, and in this particular case, in the innocence and purity and joy, if I show up that way, then that's how I get hurt. And again, you can't skip over the step of one, sort of saving your little one that's trapped there, and having a conversation with them, allowing yourself to actually see that part of you and welcome it home. And it's tricky because we have to be deeply aware of how trauma works and how trauma moves through us as people. So again, the first step is usually recognizing the patterns that you're experiencing. And then again, meeting that part of you that is trapped there and getting them unstuck and beginning to actually interact with them in yourself and in your life. And after this point, we usually also need a bit of a recovery period after we get our little ones out, to really recognize what happened and recalibrate our system and be gentle with ourselves, to be able to see that part of ourselves and not have shame for that part of ourselves, and also not have shame for why we made the decisions that we made. But there's more. And if we don't go to the next stage, we might also keep living it out. When we know our trauma from our mind, there's a way we can still get trapped in it, where we keep playing out the victim story, or we keep bringing in an outside experience to reiterate that we're not safe to express the part of ourselves that we really are. Oftentimes in the second stage, where we might get trapped, that kind of victim stage, is because we realize that something sort of bad happened. We end up looking for the one who did us wrong, our attacker, and blaming them and trying to bring them down. So we move usually from sort of attacking ourselves to attacking others or blaming others. Blame really being the most poisonous thing here, because it either means that it's their fault or our fault. But actually, it's no one's fault. As conscious beings, we're constantly interacting with other people and moving in and out of agreements with each other. And some of those we made before this lifetime. Some of those we've had running for lifetimes. Another area that we might have our trauma sort of influence our life, either consciously, usually subconsciously, is, especially with this sort of blame game, is once we realize the bad thing, then we find the person or the action that was bad, what happened to us that was bad, and we try to not be like that. We try to not be like the person who did the bad thing. And of course, it comes from a good place, but this also creates the shadow, where we also deny a big part of who we are, where we think we don't do the thing that was done to us, but we actually do. You have all the same parts. You have all the same human parts as everyone else. And so do I. And so by trying really hard to not be like them ends up, again, creating a shadow, because there's a whole part of being human that we are pushing away. And if we don't want this to control us and control our lives, instead of pushing it away, we have to actually include it. We have to include the parts of ourselves that want to have fun or want to rebel or feel trapped or does the bad thing or has desires. Or invades others. That was another part of my piece. And again, sort of the stages of moving through trauma and self-healing. When I realized how much I was desperately trying to not invade other people, one, it made it a shadow. And I thought that I didn't, but I do. Except for a long time, it was mostly subconscious. And I didn't know I was doing it. But once I could acknowledge it, that I did it and I do it, then I didn't have to spend so much energy pushing it away or denying it or trying to make it not true. And in this way, I could be more conscious of when I'm doing it. But more importantly, I can see, I've learned how to do it in a conscious way where it doesn't necessarily hurt others, you know? And looking back, I see how really fearing this part of me was a way I tried to keep myself distant or away from others so I wouldn't hurt anyone. And in that way, I wouldn't allow my gifts to come out because I thought they were inherently bad. I see a lot and I know a lot when I read the field or read someone else's energy. So I thought because I would know things, I was bad for invading their space. And now that I've done that self-care and self-healing around it, I can bring it into my business and offers and life and use it in a productive way, in a beneficial way. And continue my prayer to use it in a beautiful way. And then continuing to move through the trauma. And I'll share what was more recent for me, kind of that next layer that I started to move through. And what it feels like, looks and feels like to have a big part of our energy going towards something and trying to like deny it or push it away, right? And so what I noticed recently that was coming into my thoughts and awareness was a question. It was like I had done a bunch of work around sexual trauma and keeping secrets and invasion and permission. And it was a large part of my story. I think I did a lot of the work to move through, like there was a place where it kind of became my identity, which again is sort of that beginning stage where you got to go through it. You know, you got to, once you realize sort of what happened, there's a place where like you start to take back your power. And again, this is where it can turn into the blame game, but also it's okay to be in that space once you realize to like really, start to reclaim your power. And so working through a lot of that kind of became my identity for a little while, but I moved through that too. And that's where I began to really share it, I think, in a more conscious way, because it also, I realized it's not who I am. And then I started feeling this question, which was like, what if some of it didn't happen? Like things that happened as an adult, I definitely knew, happened. But some of the sexual trauma from being really little, it's like I could feel it in my body and I knew it was true. But then it was also like, why am I having this question of what if it wasn't true? I was so little. What if it wasn't true? And that was almost as hard to look at as it was to looking at the question of that it actually did happen and facing that part of me. I really didn't want to even utter that thought out loud. I thought if I said it out loud, I wouldn't be able to control it anymore. Like what if I learned something new and that made every part of me that I thought I knew actually just like crumble away. And then who would I be? But then again, with the journey of self-healing and moving through these layers, I also knew that I couldn't not look. I've slowly been learning when you feel that nudge from spirit, when you feel those thoughts in your awareness, you really can't hide from it. Or if you do, you're spending a lot of energy pushing it away when actually it wants to be included. And I'll probably share more about my learning here at some point soon. But for now, I'll just say, I journeyed, I looked, and I journeyed with it. And it opened up a whole new seeing about my experience at large. That I was afraid that it would sort of invalidate myself and my past if I looked at this, but it actually validated it even more and really jumped me into like a whole new seeing of what it all means for me in my life. I think that this is another tricky place that I tend to be. I kind of walk on eggshells around a little bit, and it goes back to the blame game. And it's also, I'm tiptoeing around it because it still feels a little edgy to share, because when you have experienced trauma, then the last thing, and you're starting to work through that, the last thing, you need to hear is like, oh, but it was a gift. I think that's kind of a effed up thing to say to somebody when they're in that space. And part of healing that trauma was being able to sort of get that higher viewpoint and understand the way life was working through me. And I got to see that some of the gifts that I have were actually a reaction or response to the trauma. And again, I'm kind of tiptoeing around here because, of course, I wouldn't wish trauma on anyone. And it's not okay. This is not to give permission for it to be okay. But from where I am now, I'm really happy with who I am. I wouldn't be doing the work I'm here doing right now without it. And I really love what I do and how I get to work with people in spirit. I guess what I'm trying to express is that I don't have to hold my past as a trophy of what I've been through, or have some secret past that I feel like I need to hide. Moving through both of those places has been very liberating. So the next stage here, is really your next stage in the self-healing and the trauma work and repairing the reasons that you're in the pattern that you're in is beginning to see the teachings and how it unfolds in our larger path and purpose. Because self-healing isn't just about where we were, it's also about where we're going. Why did we need to learn those lessons? What do you know now that you wouldn't know otherwise? How does it help you in your current life? And how might your learnings help others? And when we can actually see that and accept it, we really heal deeply because we aren't carrying the shame or the blame. We can finally move on. So self-care can mean a lot of things. And of course, it isn't just, self-care isn't just about trauma. So through our own healing work and healing our patterns, we work on creating balance in our lives. I think especially around time, feeling balanced in our time where we have, like one extreme or the other, where it's like we feel like we have freedom and lots of time, but we're not actually doing what we came here to do. And so even though it feels like we're free, there's a large part of ourselves that's not nourished. And on the other end of the extreme, it can also look like, just doing so much to do that we feel like we don't have time for ourselves and to do this work. So a lot of self-care is creating balance between those two. Self-care is also about being able to actually receive, whether that's compliments, whether that's money, whether that's clients. It also includes healing our money story. Self-care is very much about finding and experiencing our own self-worth. Moving from the mind place where we know we should love and accept ourselves to actually loving and accepting ourselves. Self-care includes learning to work in groups and be part of community. Healing the part of us that really wants to stay separate. Self-care includes healing the part of us that is in constant doubt of ourselves. It includes actually listening to the body and to the heart. It includes actually speaking your needs instead of accommodating everyone else. Knowing what you want and saying it. Self-care is deeply related to having boundaries and healing the part of yourself that doesn't have boundaries. And of course, ending that game of shame and blame. But just sitting here and tying it back up, these are all parts of self-care. And this is where we start in our framework. And it's a continued journey. I think that the self-care and self-healing overall, one of the most important parts of the self-care is really about trusting yourself and also trusting the process. I keep learning that, when I am nervous is when it's time to move forward. Confidence isn't that we don't feel nervous or scared. Confidence is that we trust the process so much that even when you're nervous, you do it anyway. And this is a large part of true self-healing. Mm-hmm. Thank you for joining me today. See you next time. Have you been hearing the call to expand your spiritual gifts and step into your next level of conscious leadership? If you're a coach, healer, or a spiritual leader, you can learn more about Shaman School and growing your spiritual business on our website, holtonhealingarts.com, or send me a DM at Holton Healing Arts. Welcome to today's Member Query episode, where we explore questions about spiritual paths, intuitive gifts, growing a spiritual business, and shamanism. Do you have a question for us? Send us a DM at Holton Healing Arts. Welcome back. This question is from one of our listeners, and the question is, how does shamanism play into our calling? And I think the distinction that I want to draw here is between what we often think of as shamanic healing versus living a shamanic life. You can live a shamanic life or a spiritual life and not necessarily be a formal healer. It's not actually necessarily just about being able to do the processes, doing soul retrieval, working with past lives, healing the chakras. All this stuff is really powerful and important. And that's not all of what being a healer is, and definitely not the only part of the shamanic path. It's not just about being in communication with spirits, although this is also a large part of the shamanic path. Part of living a shamanic life includes understanding energy, understanding some of the core patterns in our world, in our universe, understanding how they work through people and systems, how to reverse it. And it's also about understanding cycles that we're in, having a sense of timing and when is the right time for the next step, and listening for that. So how that can come into play with our calling is, again, it's not necessarily about becoming a healer, although it might be for you. But when we can step into this understanding and living a shamanic life in this way, living a spiritual life in this way, we begin to get clearer on what we're called here to do. And we are able to listen and interact with the signs from life, again, about the next move. We're able to gain the endless support from the earth that desperately wants to nourish us, that's always available for nourishing us. And we begin to flow more with life and understanding timing, understanding the yeses and the nos. And the more we get practice doing that, the easier it becomes to hear what life is asking us to do And this is how we stay true to our calling. Thanks again for joining me. See you next time. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Leading with Spirit. If you did, please share the link for this episode with your biggest takeaway, tagging me at Holton Healing Arts. It would also support me if you subscribed and left a rating and review of the show so we can support more people living their highest purpose. Until next time, journey on.